The Pro Show is brought to you by Rockin' Media and our proprietary Flash HDR photo process, providing you with the best, most realistic photos of your property. See the difference at rockinmedia.com. Hi, and welcome to The Pro Show. I'm Rick Machle. On today's show, we are talking to Mark Cooper about not only the Denver metro area, but also South Florida. He works both of those. We're also talking to Nancy about strategies. That's all next on The Pro Show. Joining me today is Mark Cooper from Coldwell Banker Realty here in Denver and in South Florida. And this is going to be a great discussion because it's great to have Mark on because we are talking about two different metro areas that he works. But I just want to say hi, Mark. How you doing?
Good, Rick. How's it going?
It's going well. I appreciate you being on. This is going to be really interesting. And so many of you may recognize Mark Cooper from his old Bronco days, but we're going to delve a little bit deeper. And tell me a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? That sort of thing.
Well, that kind of parlays into what we'll talk about a little later, as I grew up in Miami.
Okay.
And went to high school in Miami and then played at the University of Miami. And was actually recently inducted into the Hall of Fame at the University of Miami. So that was a heck of an honor and a lot of fun. We were just down there a couple weeks ago.
Congrats on that.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. And so that was football. Obviously, you were a lineman, correct?
Yep. Yeah, you bet. I was left tackle for Jim Kelly, who a lot of people will recognize from the Buffalo Bills.
Oh, yeah.
Hall of Fame.
Yeah. So he did it. He went kind of far in the NFL.
Great quarterback. Great quarterback.
And I kind of remember you did something after college football. You were one of the good ones. What'd you do after that? Yeah,
so I was drafted by the Denver Broncos in the second round of the 1983 draft, and that was called the quarterback draft.
Okay.
So fortunately, I was drafted by the Denver Broncos and got to play in front of John Elway for 4 years, and then I moved on to Tampa Bay Buccaneers for another 3 and played in front of Vinny Testaverde.
Okay.
So I like to tell people that I made them both famous for their scrambling ability.
Yeah. Well, I think there was you played in one of the Super Bowls, correct? With Denver?
Yeah, we played 1986. We were in the AFC Championship game against the Browns, which was called The Drive. It's a real famous, kind of come from behind story and overtime and all that good stuff. And then went on to play the Giants in Super Bowl 21 in Pasadena. And we kind of ran out of time in that game. We probably, the Giants were a pretty good football team that year. So we needed probably another week before we'd have beat them.
Yeah, or another half quarter, and you'd have beat them.
Yeah, maybe more than that.
And so obviously you got into real estate after football, correct?
I did. Real estate always intrigued me. I was involved when, in our day, we didn't exactly retire. So I was involved with a company in town that was doing real estate development and actually some industrial park stuff. And believe it or not, we had a dive operation in Turks and Caicos and a wholesale travel agency. And back in that day, it was a lot of fun. And I was doing a lot of diving and that kind of thing. And Eastern and Pan Am both went out of business 1 year after the next. So what we ended up doing is selling that travel agency to a guy down in Tampa. And then basically I sold the dive operation to the guy running it down in Turks and Caicos. But a few years later, ended up having to go get it back and then sell it to the Sheraton, who was opening up a big monster hotel down there. So we got out of there with our, the skin left. But, those were tough days because when the airlines changed, they didn't want to, do anything with airfares or anything else. American owned the entire market down there. So we were getting our bulk fare airfare agreements through those Pan Am and Eastern both. And when American owned it, they were done. They just said, we don't need competition.
We don't do that. So that made it tough. So then did you go straight into residential real estate or?
Yeah, I did. I was actually playing softball with a bunch of Remax guys and they were like, well, you're already kind of messing around in the real estate business. Why don't you just hop in?
Uh-huh.
So it was a great decision. And 33 years later, here I am.
So you've been doing it a few years. And have you been doing it both Florida and Colorado the whole time or just mainly Colorado?
Kind of an anomaly, yeah. That's kind of an anomaly. That started actually during COVID.
Okay.
So I had a buddy that was down in Miami, and he was looking at his house got blown up in the Dorian
Mm.
when it came through the Keys, and he was looking at other properties, and he was asking me, we were talking about them, and I'm giving him my advice and this and that and the other, and he's like, "Well, could you answer my calls? You give me advice. You tell me what to do. You dig up information if I need it, and you call me back like Johnny on the spot." He says, why don't you get licensed down here? And I was like, "Well, actually, I'm already licensed. I had license down there years ago and just put it in the, kind of put it on the side, it's inactive." And I said, "I can activate it if you want me to give you a hand." And he's like, "Please do." And that kind of turned, from selling his lot to selling my house on Snake Creek down in Alamorada to, gosh, you name it, numerous other properties in Key West and Marathon,
Hmm.
in Miami, in Homestead, Palm City, Fort Lauderdale, Jensen Beach, Hutchinson Island, you name it, all the way up the coast. So the MLSs work a little different down there. Like there's one MLS in the Keys, and then there's the other MLS that works from like Miami all the way north to Stewart. And when you look at the southeast coast of Florida, it's really a skinny area with a dense population because you got the whole entire Everglades
Hmm.
just south of Lake Okeechobee. So everything's kind of packed in on the coast, and you probably got over, gosh, I'd say 15 million people
Hmm.
in that neck of the woods because it's just so densely populated.
Compared to, say, the Front Range of Colorado that what has four?
Yeah, if that, right?
If
I mean,
that, maybe that's the whole state. I can't remember what our population
yeah,
is. So yeah,
yeah,
it's a tale of two different states for sure as far as population.
big time.
Big
Yeah.
difference. But you were basically a Colorado realtor during up until COVID. And
Yes.
just selling here in Colorado. I've known Mark for 15, 18 years. We've been
At
working
least.
together. It's been a long time. And so I wasn't sure that you were doing Florida until we were talking about it a little while ago, and I hadn't heard that you were doing it. So it's great to have you on to talk about both states and give an idea for our viewers as to what's going on in both of these states. And why don't we take a couple of minutes and go through some of the stats? So we haven't talked about May stats for Denver on the show, and although we're into July, we haven't seen a huge change, and we'll get to those in a couple weeks as those numbers come out. So let's go through these. We're looking at May versus April, and we're up 13.67% from 11,964 listings in April to 13,599 in May. The new listings are up 3.14% from 7,062 to 7,284. The pending listings are up 6.88% from 4,069 to 4,349, and the closed listings are down month over month by 2.63% from 4,145 to 4,036. The average close price is up 0.19% from 720,734 last year to 722,101 this year. And the median close price is down 0.66% from 604,000 to 600,000 even. The average days on the market is down a little bit month over month from 37 to 33. And the median days on the market is unchanged month over month. But let's look at year over year. So as I said, the active listings is at 13,599 year to date, and that's a 48% increase over last year. And if we look all the way back to 2022, which was that crazy market, it's up 272% from just over 3,600 listings, 3,652 to be exact. So, Mark, it appears like the market has shifted to buyers having more control of the situation. Is that what you're seeing on the ground?
Yeah, May's kind of the kickoff month, you might say, because kids start, families start thinking about what school district do they want to be in, and are they comfortable with the one that they're in, et cetera.
Hmm.
We don't have the big influx like we've had over the years. So, our bell curve is kind of the same bell curve that everybody else sees from the standpoint of, the summertime, people decide to make their moves and get settled. And right before school, things slow down. And then you go into the holidays and things kind of quiet down quite a bit. And then again, they'll kick on a little bit, in February, March, but April, May is when things really kind of crank up. When people are starting to think about making the moves. The only thing different right now that's been going on, and it's been very troubling for people in real estate in general, and the mortgage folks, is the interest rates are staying between 6.5 and 7, and and fluctuating back and forth. And then you might have a couple of week period of time where it drops down to under 6 to 6.25. But a lot of people are in those 2.5 to 2.75, 3% mortgages. So they're not all ready to move, right? Unless they
Yeah.
have to, or unless they're forced to, right? So there's not as many buyers out there in the market. We, even the listings I have, and I'm in a couple mastermind groups, and I talk to other agents. Matter of fact, I was talking to a Billy Van Hughes, and a buddy of mine who's a Remax agent forever, probably longer than I, and he and I were talking about just how slow the showings are, and I won't get into the politics, but the Fed and I think the president, aren't in alignment, and that's not helping things. So, we're not seeing the activity that we normally would see this time in the market, with inventory rising, which we need,
Right.
right? And the number of buyers out there. So, houses got to be in great shape. We're not seeing a lot of flippers. There's not a lot of flippers out there. There's not a lot of flip homes out there. And when you run across them, usually competing for them. So the market has been, you might call it stale or stagnant a little bit. And, it's making the sellers a little nervous, because they're used to seeing something fly off the market, 2, 3 years ago, where when they bought their house, they were in a bidding war, and now
Right.
things have slowed down. So it's quite a different market. And especially for agents that haven't been in the market for a very long time, because they're sitting there, they don't really understand marketing. They just put it on the market, it was gone.
Yeah.
Right now, you got to actually market the house
Yeah.
and spend time on it, and get stuff out there and on a consistent basis.
Yeah, and get it shown. But even with that, I'm hearing from you and other agents that it's still slow relative to showings this
Very,
year. And so
very slow.
so your expectation for your homeowners is patience, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, patience grasshopper, and, and a lot of folks want to make a move, and it's a little tough for them.
Yeah, yeah. And but are you then seeing any correlation with price, that people are dropping
Yeah,
their price a little bit?
here's what you're seeing. You're seeing a combination of either price reductions,
Hmm.
or maybe a price reduction, or if you're stable in your price, maybe you're offering some incentives, right, to buy down the interest rate.
Hmm.
So, a point buys a quarter roughly. So, you're talking, $15,000 to $20,000 to get that interest rate down, depending on obviously the price of the mortgage. So, it can get costly.
Right, right. Yeah, and even if you're just going from 6.5 to 6.25, that may not make somebody jump.
Yeah,
Even.
well, not only that, but you got the builders that
Oh, right,
they're offering a lot of incentives, right? So right now, the building new construction is kind of competing very well with resale, because they're offering incentives.
right.
They're offering mortgage incentives, what do you call it, appraisal incentives, and then often pricing incentives for interest rates to buy them way down into the fours.
Yeah. Well, and they
That's
have
hard
to
to
do that
compete
because
with.
they don't want to tick off the people that just bought a couple of years ago in the same neighborhood. So they're doing everything they can to make hold up the prices, but they're just
Right.
doing a whole bunch of incentives underneath the covers to make
Yeah.
it so that they can keep their price relatively the same as what they were selling for. But
You
it's
bet.
hard for the resale to compete, right?
It is. It is. It's a little frustrating too, because again, you're going to sit on the market a little bit, and then you have to tweak it. And like, I give an update to my clients like every 7 to 8 days, sometimes 10
Hmm.
plus or minus, depending on what kind of inventory is going on. And I set up a portal, so they're seeing the same thing I'm seeing. They're
Hmm.
seeing a property go under contract. They're seeing a property close. They're seeing a property go pending. So we're trying to work together as a team. to make sure that they're comfortable where we're priced and we're doing the right thing.
But the days on market are obviously up in Colorado, and that so as long as everybody has that expectation, and are you seeing there are any parts of the market that are hotter than others?
Oh, absolutely. There's certain parts of town that are, you
Okay.
go again, you go on day 2 or day 3 downtown, not like in the downtown Denver area, plus or minus in under 700,000. And, there's certain pockets. Every market has its micro market,
Hmm.
so, when you're doing your research, you know what's going to happen. You're trying to figure out where your days on market's going to be based on the sales. Right. It's just a mathematical formula. So you have a pretty good idea ahead of time. But then every once in a while, there'd be somebody that's already seen the entire market
Hmm.
and they've been just waiting for that one property to pop. And if your listing fits that parameter, boom, it's gone in a day.
Yeah.
So there are some of those still happening. And that's what's kind of frustrating for people that, work in a workplace. They're one, their colleague says, "Oh, I just sold my house,"
Right.
and there's been on the market for 3 or 4 or 5 months, and they're going, "Well, what's that about?" You know what
Yeah.
I mean? But the sales, the further you get away from the metro area, a little bit slower they are. But then, when you get out on some of the acreage stuff, a ranch is a lot more popular than a 2-story.
Hmm.
So it depends on the part of town you're in, but you just got to do dig into your data and share it.
Well, and I was looking on Zillow the other day and drawing around the whole metro area. I think we're with new and existing townhomes, condos, and single families, we're well over 15,000 homes on the market right now. And what were we looking at, like 3 to 4 just a few years ago? So, I mean, and whatever was still on there probably wasn't going to sell because it needed a lot
Right.
of work. And
Right.
so, it was it was probably less than that as far as what was actually saleable in the, 3 years ago.
Yeah, and that's what gets a little frustrating for folks because they're seeing these numbers, and these
Hmm.
numbers aren't realistic to a real market because we had such low inventory.
Right.
It becomes a scary number, right?
Right.
When it's in essence, it's not.
Well, and in fact, a lot of people didn't live through the 08, 09 great financial crisis like you and I did.
Yeah.
And this is nothing like that. I think we're at 28, 29,000 listings in the metro area at that point. And so, we're getting just more to a balanced market. But, people
Yeah.
wanted to, back then, or 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when people wanted to move, as long as they had some place to go to, which was also the opposite side of that coin, is they were ready to pop, and as soon as they put it on the market, it was gone. And so,
Right.
but then we had a lot of people, and I remember talking to you and others saying, yeah, the issue 3 years ago was they weren't putting it on the market because there was nothing to buy. So
Right. Yeah.
I think it's good to have a balanced market because it gives people time to actually find the house they want, not the last one, right? Or the first one they see.
Yeah, that and you have to be creative.
Right.
If somebody needs to get gone, you have to be creative. You got to start thinking incentives, pricing, being the lowest price guy in the neighborhood, those things. I mean, supply and demand is one thing, but
Hmm.
pricing it to be gone in a certain period of time. So that's why I think when you're looking at your inventory with your sellers, you talk about positioning
Hmm.
and where do we sit in that position and what's going to create more buyers under that circumstance.
Well, and in fact, I hear all the time now is some agents, I call it buying the listing, where they're just going in and telling you what you want to hear, not what's really going on
Yeah.
today, where somebody says my house is worth $1.2 million, because that's what Zillow said it was 3 years ago. And
Right.
so the agents are going, yeah, it's worth $1.2 million. And you're coming in going, it's going to be tough at $1.05 million. And so, but you're looking at the numbers. So I guess I don't want you talking about your competition. I'll talk about them. What you want to do is ask that agent, are they really, what numbers are they using to come up with that? Because if the comps aren't good, right, then you're going to be sitting out there. Now you're into mid-July, and now you're being asked to drop the price, and you've lost a good part of the selling season, at least here in Colorado, right?
Yes, yeah, there's so many variables that go
Yeah.
into all of that. But yeah, pretty much you're right on. When an agent buys it, all he does is create problems for his seller.
Right.
and anxiety and everything else that goes with that. And sometimes I'll be competing with an agent and they'll say, I'll get that comment from the seller and I'll say, well, do this then. Hold them to their price. When they
Yeah.
ask you for a price reduction, tell them that terminates the listing.
Yeah. That,
And you're
that
going to go with another agent because that's the only way to get around that because, they'll suck somebody into a contract and then they're toast,
maybe
you
even
know?
put a timeline on it. I'll give you 45 days to get something
Yeah.
because you're so firm about that. And obviously then they're going to have to make a choice as to whether they really can stand behind that number. And if they start to wobble, you as the homeowner might go, okay, let's go talk to
We're
Mark.
done. Yeah. Yeah. Right. It's easier to be the second guy in than the first guy overpriced.
Yeah, but it's also better to be the second guy in a day later because you were telling him the truth and what
Yeah.
the market's really doing now. And because that's what I hear too. If it's priced right, you're going to have a lot more inventory. I mean, people looking at it, they're going to, you're going to have more showings. You're more likely to get under contract a lot quicker than having to chase the market down.
Yeah. Yeah. As long as you got activity, and that's the key.
Right.
And there's some, like I said, some areas are a little slower.
Right.
55 and up communities are a little slower. There's all kinds of different variables in the market. If you haven't been in the market, it's kind of tough to even understand it or explain it correctly. And then you're shooting in the dark, and then you're really shooting your seller in the foot.
Exactly. Well, let's take a look at Florida and then talk about that. The part of Florida that Mark typically works is the Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach area on the East Coast and the Key West, Key Largo metro area on the southwest part of Florida. So we're going to look at Miami and Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach, and the sales inventory growth from last year is up 40.6%, and in Key Largo it's up 21.6%. When we look at home sales, in Key West, they're down 3.3% year over year and down 15.1% in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach. The days on the market in Key West, Key Largo are up 8.7% year over year, and they're up 12.5% year over year in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach. And when it comes to the median list price year over year, they're down 0.7% in Key West, Key Largo, and down 5.5% in Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach. The new listing count in Key West, Key Largo is down 9.3% and just 1% on the Miami, Fort Lauderdale, West Palm Beach area. So, Mark, when we're talking about Miami-Dade and the Keys and that area, is that a different selling season like than we have here in Colorado? Is it kind of, do people, or is it just a year round down there? We really have
It's a little bit longer
season.
cycle. Yeah, Christmas holidays, things are slow, just like they are here.
Right.
But the selling season down there is quite a bit longer, and the reason is you got snowbirds going down,
Right.
and they're going into town, and then they'll look around and they'll look for stuff. But the other issue in South Florida is in the past few years there was a condominium property that just basically fell down, right? And so there's a new recertification going on, and what's going on in South Florida is there's a glut of townhomes and condominiums over 4 stories that are just all over. The market's loaded with them, right? And here's what's happened. HOA fees have gone up. Say they were 600, now they're almost 9 to 1,000. And then you have they didn't run the homeowners associations there run on assessments.
Okay.
Right. So versus doing a reserve study and knowing what your costs are going to be to maintain your pool and your exteriors and your parking lots and all the things that go, into a property, they would run it by assessment every year. And if they needed something, they'd assess the people, right? Well, now everybody's got to be recertified, and they have to have a reserve study done, and then they have to put that money aside for those future fixes over the next 10 to 20 years, right?
Okay.
So that's put people in a bind, but they're also coming up with a way to finance that and some other ways to keep people just from throwing them out of their condominiums,
Right. Right.
But there's such a glut in like South Florida on Brickell Avenue and that area. There's such a glut. There's like when you're driving through there, the traffic's horrible, and there's cranes everywhere. So
Right.
you kind of design your day around traffic patterns to where you're going to be and where you're going in the Miami-Dade area. The keys are quite different. The
Hmm.
keys are a total different anomaly, but also the insurance has gone up down there. There's a thing called a 4-point inspection, and that's critical. So I get them done right away for my buyers so that we know what issues we have to deal with. And if you're listing a property, you want to know what your issues are to deal with from an insurance standpoint, because that can crash a deal, right? So
Hmm.
it's kind of like it's quite opposite of what we see in Colorado. I've had agents say to me, "You do more inspections than I've ever done." And I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, no, because I'm protecting my buyer's interest, right?
Right.
Because Florida is a buyer beware state. And I got to be totally honest with you. I've literally been lied to my face multiple times.
Hmm.
And I'll just go, I'll say, could you say that again? Or maybe I didn't quite hear exactly the way you said it. Could you explain that to me more? Because I'm trying to figure out what they're asking or saying when they're actually not telling the truth.
Right.
Right. And then I'll say, okay, can you back that up? You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Or I'll say, are you willing to put your commission on the line for that? You know what I mean? So I politely try and, see if I can get the truth out of them one way or the other in certain circumstances. So it's just a weird place to do real estate under those circumstances, right? So my clients, a lot of them I've known for most of my life.
Hmm.
So they know when I'm doing the transaction, I'm almost doing it like it's my own,
Right.
right? So we have buyer agency here. They didn't really have buyer agency in South Florida until the new NAR thing came out with the buyers, all the things
Hmm.
that went on with the NAR lawsuit. So now they've got, buyer agency going on, et
Okay.
cetera, but not to the fiduciary responsibility level. So, which really still blows my mind,
Yeah.
but that's what it is, right? So you deal in any market the way you dance,
Right.
right? You come up with a plan and you put in 33 years, you figured it out, right? I mean,
Right.
everything's about systems. So you just create a new set of systems for that marketplace and run with them so that you're ahead of the game and you anticipate the things that are going on in the transaction, and you know what to look for ahead of time so you don't get closer to closing
Hmm.
and run into a bind. Because in Florida, like in Colorado, you got 13, 14 outs in the contract for the buyer. In Florida, there's not very many outs, and they'll try and keep your earnest money if it's possible.
Mm. Are you then finding, because the new laws are relative to older buildings, that there's a higher demand for newer buildings now if you're looking for a condo down there?
Not so much. It's more location
Okay.
and price.
Okay. Well,
Because
obviously,
some
if you've
people,
got enough money, you'll go to high rise right on the beach and don't worry about
right?
it. But
Good
yeah,
point.
I've seen online that there's a number of assessments for huge numbers because a lot of stuff just wasn't getting done for 20 years, and now they're having
Right.
to pick it up and catch up. And one of the reasons I heard that this wasn't happening was people were getting on the boards and going, "Well, I'm only going to be here for 3 years, and if we need a new roof in 8, I don't want to pay for that." And so
Right.
they just were deferring all that and not paying for it. Now you need a new roof for the building fell down, so you need a new parking garage, that sort of thing. So it makes it much more complex. Then you add in like you said, the higher HOAs and the higher insurance from all the hurricanes we're seeing. Are you seeing anything relative to, the water table or any of that going up?
No, that's always been interesting to me. So here's what people don't understand: on a full moon
yeah,
and a high tide
yep,
and an incoming wind
okay,
stacks the water up,
okay,
and it'll stack it up higher,
yeah.
right? So there's a lot
It's
of there's a
it's
lot of
like a mini
dimensions.
hurricane then,
Yeah,
essentially. Yeah.
right. Pushing
Hurricane.
water in a direction and keeping water in a certain direction, and then the tide comes in, and that water that's already there gets duplicated twice or three times,
Right.
and you get a flood,
Right.
right? So again, there's so many factors that you don't hear about on the news,
Right.
obviously,
Right.
that have to do with what the water's doing, the water tables. But I mean, I'm 65 years old, and I've been going in and out of there for my whole life, and I've
Right.
been on the water whole
Right.
life. I couldn't tell you I've seen an inch of difference. So
Yeah.
that's just me inexperienced.
Yeah, that's the whole thing, is that listen to somebody who's been there, not somebody who's from Colorado talking about Miami.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's interesting that you were talking about the snowbirds. I would imagine you might have some sunbirds who want to get out of Florida in the summer and go to Colorado and
There you go.
get here and have a mountain home during the heat of Florida as well. You can always turn on the air conditioner, but yeah. So I guess it must be kind of interesting seeing both sides of it.
It is. It really is, because a lot of the people in Florida do, they go to North and South Carolina.
Sure.
And they get up in the hills, and it's a lot cooler, and they spend their summers up there when it's, Africa hot in Florida, which, I don't mind. I grew up there, so it doesn't, humidity and heat doesn't
Right.
really bother me. But like, I talked to some of my friends in Colorado, and they'd rather go to Cabo, where there's no, relatively less humidity, even though the
Right.
heat's there, versus Florida, where, you're dripping sweat. And it's Africa hot there too. But so just everybody has their own preference, and that's why people go to Cabo in Arizona versus Florida and the Bahamas. And the thing I like about South Florida is you're so close to all the other islands. You can hop a boat, and it's 45 miles away to Bimini,
Yeah.
right? 72 to Grand Bahama, and Sal Banks is 30 miles offshore, and Cuba's only 90 miles from Cuba. I mean, from Key West. You know what I
Right.
mean? So there's so many dynamics down there in islands to fish and swim and scuba dive and do all those kind of fun events, outdoor events, boating, sandbarring.
Well, I'd recommend they come to Colorado in the summer. If they want to get away, don't go to North Carolina. Come to
Hey,
Colorado.
don't go to Carolinas. Come on out here.
Yeah,
Call me up.
we got 85 degrees and maybe 90, about 12% humidity. It's
Yeah.
it's like Miami in July or in January. Uh, so
Right.
you can come to Colorado and spend your summers here. It'd just be fine. And then go back down there when you don't want to deal with our snow, which makes a lot of sense too. So, which I
Right.
think is really what is going on with Mark, is he wants to go to Miami in the winter and hang out down there. But he's here too. I see him a lot in the winter here. But
Oh yeah.
so, what are they doing relative to like older condos that just aren't making the grade? In other words, that
They're having to fix them. Literally having to fix them. I mean, they're digging in, they're tearing out rebar, they're repouring cement, you name it. I mean, they're literally having to, dig deep and get rid of the rust and some of those items that have been done. I haven't seen one building condemned yet, so that's a good thing. I imagine there could be one or two coming up. Who knows? But even the keys. See, like every municipality has a little different process, even though you got a state law. So they're even the smaller units, like 2 and 3 story units down in the Keys, they're being recertified right now too. Because I've got a listing in Marathon, and we're supposed to have the recertification like this week or next week. We add that to the supplements so that people can see that. But they know it's been done and it's passed. So we've got that data, but I don't have the piece of paper in front of me for that, for that sale.
right.
So, you try and hustle up, that process so that you can, sell it a little bit faster too.
And I've heard some of the homes, like if they have enough hurricane damage, they have to raise them. Is that right?
Yeah, that's a FEMA rule. So
Okay.
that's a FEMA rule regardless of where you're at, right? That's Texas all the way up
Okay.
the coast, you name it. So yeah, the appraised value and the improved value are two different things, right? Because they don't use the land value, and the land value is relatively higher than the construction values. So if you got to do more than 50% renovation, then you have to lift it above flood. Right. So
Okay.
now you got to lift it above, depending on what your flood level is, you're talking 13, 14 feet, typically
Right.
above sea level, to get that out of the flood zone so that it can be rebuilt. And then so that you're not rebuilding something that gets blown up again. Or like I have a buddy, here's a prime example, right over in St. Pete. Well, he went through 2 storms this past year. Right. And he had about 50% damage, and he was starting to think about getting it rebuilt. And here comes another hurricane, took him past 50. Now he's got to lift the property above flood to rebuild it.
Right.
And that adds about, $60 to $80,000,
Wow.
depending on the footprint you have, just to lift it, get that lifted up on
So
stilts. And with now you got stairs going up to it and everything else.
right. So then it comes a matter of, is it worth it? Is what when you
Right.
do all the appraisal and get it all done, and you've spent another 60,000 to 80,000 to raise it, does it make
Yeah.
sense to do it? And obviously that's easier on a single family than if you're talking a condo, which of course, most likely if it's to that, I assume we were just talking mainly single family, right?
Just residential, single
Detached.
family stuff. Yeah, condos are
Detached.
totally different.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, but I've heard some of the,
Usually you only have one floor to deal with, so you have an
sure,
entire complex, so they just rebuild the one floor. Or if they were smart, sometimes they'll take that bottom floor out, turn it into parking, and make the first floor really the second floor, right?
sure.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But I've heard, whole communities of older people in older homes, it just doesn't make sense for them financially to do it.
No, they don't have the money and they don't have the time, and they're not going to be there that long.
And the appraised value is pretty good for land if you're going to turn it into a real nice high-rise condo. So, so that may be a motivating factor down there as well. But yeah, it's definitely a tale of two markets between Denver and here. It must be interesting to.
No, it really is. It's like, I mean, you're always learning in real estate. I don't think I learn something new all the time. And then you incorporate it into your business and you incorporate it into your processes.
Right.
And then it's just another line item that you make sure you take care of. And I've got, good guys I work with down in South Florida, and I'm not there by myself. Like
Right.
I've got Kim Browning down in Alamorada that I work with. I've got another gal I'm interviewing right now up in Fort Lauderdale, who I may start working with. And then I've got a gal up in Palm City, which is Jensen Beach, Hutchinson Island, Palm City. So when I'm not there, I have somebody to cover, and same here. Michael Marcus and I work together, or not Michael Marcus, but Marcus Harris and I work together, quite often. When he's out of town, I'll cover for him. When I'm out, I cover, we cover for each other, and I'm looking to bring another team member on so that, I have additional coverage. So, but it's so funny, Rick, when you got an iPad, an iPhone, your computer with you, you can literally be at a Starbucks and kind of run your entire business the way things are now with Zoom,
Right.
and phone calls, and even when I'm on a boat, like I got some friends I run around with in the Bahamas from time to time. That Starlink is a game changer.
Right.
I mean, it is faster than my office and it's faster than my house. Internet connections are amazing, and the quality of the telephone calls and such. I mean, I'm in San Salvador, Bahamas, and it's like me and you having a conversation right here, and that's right next to Turks and Caicos, almost 400 miles offshore.
I think we should do a pro show episode when you're on a boat out there. And,
Right.
And you can have the ocean in the background and a fish off to your right hand side. We can.
Hey, Zoom, don't I got some
Yeah.
things I can click on, and have palm trees behind me.
Exactly. You could just do a fake background back there, but I think it'd be better when it's real. And and I don't think the density out there on the water, you got a lot of competition for that bandwidth out there in the water. So that's probably why it's really good. So obviously it makes a big difference to have somebody who, like Mark, who's been actually doing both areas, lived in Miami his whole life, knows the area, and then in Colorado. How many years you been doing real estate here? 30?
33, but I mean, think about it. But I've been fishing in Florida my whole life.
Yeah.
I mean, from from basically Stewart to Key West, and I know that area, a lot like the back of my hand as well. And then, with the amount of data that you have at your fingertips, you can dig in on an area, and you can dig in on a market, and you can dig on the statistics, and you can find out pretty much anything you need to know about a marketplace. You know what I mean? Relatively quick if you've been doing it as long as I have.
Yeah. Well, and that's the plus side is you can do your job from anywhere. The downside is you never get to leave it. and now with Starlink, you can't even go, sorry, I'm on the boat.
Right. Yeah.
Joining us every week is Nancy Alexander from Smart Mortgage Services, and today we're going to talk about strategy and negotiation. Hi, Nancy. How you doing?
Good, Rick. How are you?
I'm doing great. So I found my great home. I think it's priced pretty well, but I'm now trying to figure out Okay, let's start that again. I was trying to figure out as far as I can. Anyway, so as always, we have Nancy Alexander from Smart Mortgage Services with us. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Rick. How are you today?
I'm doing great. So they talk about real estate as strategy and negotiation. And so I want to kind of talk about that relative to lender today. I found my perfect home. I'm thinking this is a great opportunity. I love it, whether it's for an investment or whether it's for my primary residence. And I'm just curious as to what part of that process does a lender or should a lender play?
God, it's a good question. We could go deep on that.
Yeah.
On the
Okay, in
surface,
5 minutes.
yeah, I was going to say on the surface. Your lender's all about your numbers, right? I
Right,
mean, obviously, it's about your assets, it's about your income stream, and it's about your numbers. It's about what do you want to pay on a monthly basis, right?
right.
And so I would start my strategy with my lender to say, what do the numbers look like? What is it? Let's say it's 800,000,
Okay.
right? What is it? Let's say purchase price is 800,000.
Hmm.
Let's say I'm going to put 200,000 down. We'll make these numbers easy,
Sure.
right? And we're going to have a loan amount of 600,000.
Okay.
So what does that look like? So here's a rule of thumb, you guys, for your strategy out of pocket that's super easy. Take your interest rate times every 100,000 you owe. So let's for fun, let's say the interest rate 6%.
Okay.
Okay, if you owe 100,000, 6%, it would be $600
Hmm.
for that principal and interest payment. So now we owe 600,000. Remember, we got 800,000. We're putting 200,000 down. We owe 600,000.
Hmm.
Now you can say 6 times 6. The loan amount is 600,000. The interest rate is 6%. 6 times 6 is 36.
Okay.
Okay, so 3,600 is going to be our principal and interest payment. Go back to the strategy for a minute. How does that feel?
Right.
Is that right? Is that something that you as the buyer are saying, hey, I've just thrown a budget out in my head to say it's 4,500 bucks.
Right.
Okay, well, if we know principal and interest is sitting at 3,600 in this example, add your taxes, add your homeowner's insurance, you're probably going to be up against 4,300 bucks. Score, you're
Yep.
below your 4,500. So far, you're within your strategic thinking,
Okay.
right? If you, so then do you want to go into looking at, you should see what's out there as far as your loan programs, be it an ARM, an adjustable rate mortgage. How long are you going to stay in the house? Huge piece of your strategy, right? I'm buying the house, but is this what I think is my forever house? Is it where I'm going to raise the kids through high school? Am I retiring and I think I really don't want to move again? And I want to look at a 15-year fixed. Remember, with the numbers I just gave you are based on a 30-year.
Okay.
So a 15-year has a different set of numbers. So if I don't want to do the ARM or the 30-year, I'm looking at a 15-year. I can look at a 10. I can look at a 20, right? But
Right.
then I can also look at a 2-1 buy down. We've talked about these
Right.
before, buying interest rate down 2 percentage points for the first year. 6% turns into 4% year one. 6% turns into 5% year two, right?
Right.
Or you go into a 1-1 buy down. You start at 6%, but for the first 2 years, you're at 5% each year, right? If you're still in the loan, then in that third year, you go back to the 6%. Hopefully, you're going to be expecting to refinance because the market's going to be better. So strategy over your numbers. Can you afford? Do you want to afford what it is you're looking at for that purchase price? Last but not least, I'll say this. For every $10,000 differential, the
Hmm.
equation works the same way.
Okay.
So if your rate is 6%, Rick, and you got a $10,000 difference, in other words, that purchase price is 850 and you think bringing it down to 800
Right.
is going to make all the difference in your numbers. Five, right? We have a $50,000
Right.
difference between 850 and 8. We have a 6% interest rate. 5 times 6 is 30. That's $300 difference for 50,000 difference in a purchase price. That's not going to make your PITI drop by $1,000
Right.
because, right, because you've gone for a cheaper house. So get with your lender, Call me if you, I'm more than happy to go through those numbers with you. That's the fun part of it as far as I'm concerned. Those are the puzzle pieces you and I talk about.
Well, that's great information. Obviously, somebody listening to this might go, "Okay, think I got part of it." So, as Nancy said, what you really want to do is call Nancy and go, "Okay, I heard on the podcast that you can do this, and give me some ideas as to how I can afford this, or whether I should afford it based on my numbers." Because I mean, sometimes the strategy has to be, "Yeah, I need to go to a less expensive property, and maybe it's no, I can afford more, or I forgot about the $500 a month HOA," and that then causes a whole
Exactly.
other question. But it's part of that strategy, so you can make sure that you are in your property for as long as you want to be, as opposed to how long you think you should be, and then you find out, oops, I overshot the runway.
Right, it's the asset that's what you're saying. It's the asset that
Right.
you want it to be,
Right.
right? That it's working for you. Because remember, you guys, real estate is no different than your 401k, your IRA, your stocks, your bonds,
Right.
your checking, your savings. It's just part of that asset portfolio. And I think that's what you're really bringing up, Rick, is does the asset work for you?
In many different ways, whether it's as part of your assets, or even as, does it mean you're working for your house, and you have no chance to live because you didn't do this strategy first. So as always, give Nancy a call, and you can do so at the number on the screen. And great talking to you again, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, Nancy. So this is a great opportunity for us to find out a little bit more about Mark. And the way we do that is what I call 10 favorites. It's kind of a fun part where we go through and find out a little bit different things that normally he wouldn't be asked. And the first thing we start with is your favorite food.
Okay, that's easy. Key lime pie.
All right, cool. And what about your favorite pastime?
Probably chasing stone crabs and then having them for dinner too. So that kind of goes hand in hand.
Oh, so that's a favorite food and a pastime.
You bet. In the current time.
How about your favorite type of music, or band, or both?
Oh, I'd have to go with Jimmy Buffett stuff. You know, I'm an old Florida boy, and you know that. And there's a oh, what's the name of these? Stick Figure is like a new band out there, and they call it white guy reggae. And no offense to anybody, but that's what they call it. It's hysterical, but it's great reggae.
Okay. And what about favorite place to visit in Colorado? And since you also do Florida, we'll do both.
Yeah, boy, Colorado. You know, the mountains. I mean, just getting up in the mountain. Every time I go up there, you kind of go, why aren't I coming up here more often? Right? Because it's just so beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. And how about in Florida?
The Keys, Florida Keys is a tough place in Florida, but you know, I really like the islands too. I'm a big Bahama guy.
That's not Florida. That's not Florida.
Yeah, okay, Florida. We'll just stick with the Keys.
Okay, but now we can say in the world. How about in the world? You like the Bahamas?
Well, I'm gonna throw Cuba out there because Cuba was magnificent. I've been there twice.
Okay.
The fishing's off the charts. The people are the nicest people in the world. They don't even know what's going on, unfortunately, and you gotta love them for that.
Yeah. How about your favorite restaurant or restaurants?
Oh boy, okay. In Colorado, I'm going to go with Flagstaff House, right?
Yep.
And the Blue Bonnet for Mexican food. And then Keys, I'm going to go with A&B Lobster House in Key West, and Joe's Stone Crab in Miami Beach. Crazy good.
There we go. We got some recommendations from someone who knows both of them. And I would agree with your two Colorado ones. I love both those restaurants. Favorite time of the year?
Actually, this is my favorite time of the year because real estate cranks up, you get going. And also I run in and out of the Keys a little bit to tarpon fish. So there's the thing called the tarpon migration down there. So I get out there and fly fish the tarpon, and there's nothing more exhilarating in the world. It's what replaced my game day thrill is chasing tarpon on a fly rod in the Florida Keys.
Gotcha. Favorite smell?
The salt air.
Salt air. Okay. And how about favorite childhood memory?
You know, I'd have to say going out on the boat to Elliott Key with my mom and dad when I was a kid.
Okay. Just kind of hanging out with them, huh?
Yeah,
Is that
that, snorkeling and scuba diving and, skiing and fishing and, just that stuff was amazing to me.
down there? Is that a weekend type thing, or is it like
Yeah.
and vacations, or yeah, it's just
Weekend and vacation, yeah. Because we had, like I said, we had a small boat, and we'd go out to Elliott Key, and we'd camp out there for a weekend, or we'd pop in and out. And like I said, that was a really great place to grow up as a kid. The water was gin clear. Now it's not quite as, but that has a lot to do with the dynamics of Lake Okeechobee and all the stuff that's going on with sugar and everything else. That's a whole nother
yeah,
conversation.
exactly. And what's your favorite part of what you do as a real estate agent?
Probably the thrill of seeing the client get all excited at closing, and they've just closed on their new home, and seeing the exhilaration that they have in accomplishing what we accomplished.
Just getting to close and
Yeah,
watching their reactions. That's pretty
totally. It's
that's pretty
beautiful.
amazing. So now you know all there is to know about Mark Cooper, or at least a little bit more about him
Yeah,
as
you bet.
well. Mark has a wonderful home for sale that he's listing. It's at 12825 West 81st Avenue in Arvada, Colorado. And it's a 5-bedroom, 6-bath, 5,541 square foot home. And currently, as of the time of this recording, it's at 1.875 million. And tell me a little bit about this home, Mark.
Boy, I'll tell you, it's a wonderful property. I sold it to the client probably 20 years ago. It's a 5-bed, 6-bath, and it's got 5,500 square feet. It's in a great location, great yard, big basement. There's plenty of expansion you could do in the basement. It's got a first floor study, along with just a beautifully done. There's not a trick really missed in this, and even though we did repaint the kitchen, and we'll have those pictures in soon. We did that just to kind of get a little bit of the dating out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But we also have a carpet allowance that we'll let folks pick, and I've got carpet samples at the house that people can choose from. So sellers, great people, love them to death. They're easy to work with. Great property. Boy, if you're in that price bracket, this is something you want to see. By all means, it's just really well kept, really well done, really well built. I've got a list of everything that's been done to that property because it was built brand new when we bought it. So that red you're seeing in that kitchen, that's now all white, and it's beautiful.
So we have
And
white cabinets.
we actually even lightened up the floors.
Okay.
So we want to take a little of the dating out of this thing, even though, all the photography done with you, Rick, we just decided that, it was showing a little bit dated. So let's try and clean it up a little bit for the new buyer.
Absolutely. And this is one of my top homes. I love this house. It's great. The back is amazing. It's got multiple different areas to entertain at, right?
It really does. I mean, you got like kids, trampoline over there. You got a fire pit.
Mm-hmm.
If you got a big yard and open space behind it, there is railroad tracks behind it. I won't fool anybody, but you know what? You don't hear them like you would the old trains of clackety clack and all that stuff back in the day.
Right.
So this in Alcar Estates, and if you look at Alcar is all custom homes. There's not that's not a community. That was done by Richmond Homes or those groups. Every single home in this community is all custom done by lots of different builders, and that's what you'll notice when you drive in and out of there. It's an amazing community.
Yeah, it's a great property on an awesome home site. What is it, like half acre? A little bit more?
Just about a half acre, yeah.
Yeah, so it's but it's well laid out, so not a ton of lawn to mow, which is great.
Right.
You
Yep.
got a lot of natural areas.
That big berm in the back is beautiful, like I said, with the fire pit and such. And
Exactly.
it's a beautiful, and it's right down the street from Ralston High School.
Well, that's awesome. If you want to take a look at this home and get a tour, please reach out to Mark. I'm sure he'd be happy to show it to you. Well, thanks, Mark, for being on today. It's been great. I love hearing about both Florida and Colorado from somebody who has been working them a long time and knows them really well. It's great having you on. Maybe next time we have you on in a few weeks or a month or two, you can talk about different property types, mainly in Southeast Colorado, where you spend a lot of your, or Southeast metro area where you spend a lot of your time, and then also down in the south part of Florida. How's that sound?
Yeah, you bet, Rick. I've loved working with you. You're the best drone guy and photographer I've ever used, and that's why I try and do everything with you. And you and I've always joked about, I wish I could take you to Florida with me to do stuff because I have to use different vendors down there, right? So
I'll hang out in your suitcase. Yeah, get a bigger suitcase. I'm happy to come down. Right. But obvious, or maybe it's a big, very expensive property. You can have me down to do it. It'll make it worth it. But if you want to get a hold of Mark, you can do so by reaching him at the number on the screen. I'm sure he'd take your call, whether you're looking at real estate here in Colorado or down in Florida. He'd love to talk to you about your needs, and great to have you on. Thanks again, Mark. And if you want to learn more about real estate, we've got many episodes here on theproshow.com. That's with the word theproshow.com. We have probably over 36 episodes now covering all sorts of information. So it's great having Mark on, and look forward to seeing you again next week.